with that, I want to take a moment to introduce our candidates, and I did not ask for bios for all of them, so I will let them give their own bios. We are going to go in alphabetical order, and so that means Deja Fox, if you want to go ahead. So just so I let everyone know, each candidate will be given 5 minutes to speak, to tell you about their platform, their campaign. We'll make sure we get contact info if you're interested in getting involved. And then after each candidate speaks, then we'll go ahead and open it up for questions to any or all of the candidates. And that way they can answer those questions. So we'll go ahead and start with Deja Fox, and then we'll move on to Adelita Grijalva, and then Daniel Hernandez will wrap up the speeches. So Deja?
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, y'all. My name is Deja Fox. I'm a born and raised Tucsonan. And what brings me to this work is that it's deeply personal. I was raised by a single mom in Section 8 housing and on SNAP benefits and Medicaid. And I was a free lunch kid in our public schools. And so for me, the feeling that elected officials were debating the things that I needed to just get by was something I was familiar with from a really young age. I didn't have to learn about politics in school or from the news. I learned it in my neighborhood where people were made to not have enough. My earliest organizing memories are of my neighbors making enough together. I think about these moments, right? My mom, as a single mom, she did every odd job you could imagine. She cleaned houses, she delivered flowers, she was a caregiver for the elderly and even worked at a post office. But in the times where she was in between work, she would step up to babysit for neighbors so they could pick up an extra shift, right? And I think about that as we think about creating childcare policies that make sense for all of our working families. But I also think about the times in which me and my family didn't have a car, right? When we would take the bus to go to school or work, or a neighbor might volunteer to drive us, in the ways that transportation policy or climate change becomes deeply personal when you're waiting for the bus for 20 minutes in 117-degree weather in the summer. And so I share all of that to say that my organizing and political journey comes from a deeply personal and felt place. And I got my start as an activist on the other side of power nearly a decade ago. And I'll address the elephant in the room that, yes, I am 25 years old. Which was my final qualification for this run, I'll tell you. We gathered all the signatures, twice as many as we needed. We're certified with the Secretary of State, and I just had to turn 25 a few weeks ago to make this run possible. But I've been in this work for a decade. I got my start advocating for better sex education in our TUSD schools because I needed it, because I moved out of my mom's house really young. She had struggles with substance abuse, and while she was navigating a rehabilitation process, I was navigating finding housing. I lived with my boyfriend and his family, a story that is all too common for young people here in Arizona and all across the country. And it's why affordable housing is also one of the key issues that I want to dig into. But, it was in that moment, sitting in a sex ed class with a curriculum last updated in the 80s that didn't mention consent, was medically inaccurate, and was taught by the baseball coach, that I demanded better for young people like me. I continued to show up to school board meetings and share that personal story. And if you can put yourself in my shoes, to be a teenage girl, that is one of the scariest things you can get up there and admit. All you want to do is be like everybody else. But I saw a power in that story and continued to use it, showing up week after week, Tuesday after Tuesday, to school board meetings demanding better. And I'm comfortable being on the other side of power. I scaled up my work under Trump administration 1 when Republicans right here in Arizona, like Jeff Flake, tried to defund Planned Parenthood centers, where I got care when I had no money, no parents, and no insurance. And I actually had my first viral moment when I was 16, when I asked Jeff Flake why he was making decisions about me and my body, right, without ever consulting me. And he told me, sort of a canned politician response, that he supported policies that support the American dream. And I asked him, why he would deny me the American dream. Millions of people saw that video overnight, something like 17 million. And my life went from private to public. I was on even footing, a teenage girl experiencing homelessness, working at the gas station on even footing in the public discourse with the United States Senator. Something that really is unheard of in the course of our history. And I scaled up that work, continued to pull that thread as I went on, despite Republicans' best efforts to be the first in my family to go to college because of good policy. I went to Columbia University in New York City. And I worked on campaigns, history-making campaigns like Kamala Harris's, both behind the scenes as a digital strategist, one of the youngest presidential staffers in history at 19 years old, and in front of the camera, speaking at this year's DNC, highlighting issues of affordability, reproductive rights, climate change, student debt on the stage at the DNC. And what brings me to this race, right, is exactly what brought me home. That I know working families like ours deserve a fighter. And I have a decade of advocacy experience that I bring to this work. It's a new kind of perspective, and we have an opportunity here in Southern Arizona to make history and elect the first woman of my generation to Congress. And I want to make something very clear that women of my generation are the very first to have less rights than their mother. And that is something that is deeply felt in a sense of urgency I bring with me. And with that, I'll pass it along.
Can we clap?
Thank you,
Thank you.
Deja. Again, please keep your questions in mind. If you have questions and you're in the Zoom room and you want to drop them in the chat, I'll make sure to get those once we move on to that portion. But right now we're going to move on to Adelita Grijalva.
Hi, buenas noches. My name is Adelita Grijalva. I've been introducing myself as the it becomes very personal for me now, as the granddaughter of a bracero and the daughter of a member of Congress. And I think that for me, that is the American dream that we all are fighting for ourselves and for our kids in one generation, for so much to change for a family. And the door that was opened for my family was public education. And so I want to thank you all for having me. When starting this race, we started on March 31st. And I think that I want to introduce myself to some of you who may not have had the opportunity to get to know me. I am a mom of 3. I have 3 children. My daughter Adelina is graduating from high school in May. My son Raul is 16 and my son Joaquin is 14. And I started out where I went to Pueblo High School, Hollinger. I've all born and raised in Tucson. And I started out working at 15 years old because both my parents worked and were very hard workers. But if I wanted anything, any shoes, anything, I had to raise the money myself. And so I started working at 15 at the original hamburger stand and worked at Mervyn's, worked at call centers. And after I graduated from the U of A, I applied for a job running a juvenile diversion program called Teen Court. And it was for young people who'd been arrested for small things that happened at school for the most part. And there was a group of young people that volunteered and those that had to go through the process as part of the program. And I was at that job for 26 years. It was a nonprofit. And overlapping that time, I was on the Tucson Unified School District Governing Board for 20 years. And that is a volunteer but elected position. So you have to run for office, but there is no compensation for that. And 4 years on the Pima County Board of Supervisors, 4 years and 3 months, because my father, Congressman Grijalva, passed away on March 13th. And I talked to my family, talked to my kids, and made the decision to run for this office and resigned. I was sworn in January and resigned from the position on April 4th. So the reason why I'm running is also very personal in that there's so many things that I've learned about the work that my dad did, not just for Southern Arizona, but for so many communities across the nation. And the biggest issues when I'm talking to people, going door to door, when I went to Yuma. The very first stop on my campaign trail was in Yuma, in Somerton and San Luis. And the top issues are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, VA benefits, and the drastic cuts to our VA. Affordability, making sure families don't have to make decisions about whether they're going to go to the doctors or the dentist or have groceries on the table. Climate change is really important. And as we get into the summer season, our communities have had the highest number of over 100-degree days that we've ever had, historic highs. And Yuma had, I believe, 117 days last year that were over 100. And so how do we protect our workers that are out? Public education, as I mentioned, I am a product of public schools, graduated from the University of Arizona, and we all want to make sure that our young people and those that are returning to work because their jobs, after COVID weren't there, like to make sure that people have opportunities and to get their education and have a better life for themselves and for their families. And I think that one of the best models that I've seen is in Yuma, where you have an opportunity at a local community college to be able to get a 4-year degree. That's something that should be open in many more communities. So big kudos to Yuma for providing those options locally. Our rights and our freedoms. With the wave of a pen, Donald Trump is able to just eliminate our rights, eliminate sovereign nation commitments and commitments to our people. Immigration with, 257 miles of the border in this district. It is an incredibly important issue. And, when I speak to communities that are on the border, that relationship with Mexico and being able to cross and visit family and being able to go across to work back and forth is something that we all understand and know. But I think that if you look at the news and listen to Trump, you wouldn't know that there are communities that we thrive on that relationship, and it's a necessary one. So I think that it's important for us to be able to look past some of the differences that we have and really have people that are going to fight for the rights of our community. And that is something that I have done my entire life. I've been in elected office for 22 years on the Tucson Unified School District Governing Board and the Pima County Board of Supervisors. I want to thank so many people in Yuma County that have endorsed my race, and after meeting with them have supported me, including the chair of Yuma County, Martin Porchas, Superintendent Tony Reyes, the mayor of Somerton, Ayana, the mayor of San Luis, Rydell, San Luis council members. I see her here, Lisette Servin and Luis Cadera. Thank you. And former State House Minority Leader Charlene Fernandez and Representative Mariana Sandoval. I appreciate all of their support. And I think the thing that has resonated is my willingness to go out and listen to what the needs are in every individual community, because as close as San Luis and Somerton are, your needs are different. And I think it's important to have a representative that is willing to stand up and speak to those. I do want to say that I anticipate every time I'm talking that I'm being recorded, because I want people to understand that when I say that I'm going to be available, when I say that my door is open, that has consistently been what I have done. I have been in elected office for 22 years, and I have missed 3 meetings, and I have 3 kids. So there is a commitment there that it is a privilege to serve in public office. It is a privilege to represent people, and that our responsibility is to show up and be there and be your voice. And so I am a very involved, active mariachi mom, drama mom. I mean, my priority is my family, but I stand up for all young people. When I say I show up, and I want to make sure to be your voice when in Congress, that will be my responsibility and my privilege and honor. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll go ahead and stop now. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. And now for the final candidate joining us this evening, Daniel Hernandez.
Thank you so much, Zan. It's so good to be talking to all of you today. I missed the Denim and Diamond dinner. It's been a couple years since I've had the opportunity to go, so I hope that we'll be able to do that soon. My name is Daniel Hernandez, and I am so excited to be talking to all of you. I was in Yuma on Saturday, getting a chance to reconnect with folks that I hadn't seen since the end of last year, because the last time I was in Yuma was meeting with folks talking about the importance of education. I've been serving with a nonprofit for the last 2 years since I left the legislature. And I was doing events in LD 23, trying to help make sure that we turned out voters to win back that state house seat, because it's so important that in order for us to work on the important issues, that we take back the LD 23 house seat. So hoping that this year will be the year, or 26 will be the year where we take that seat back. But my name is Daniel Hernandez. I am the son of a construction worker, and a Mexican immigrant mom. I grew up here in the city of Tucson. I was born and raised in the south part of Tucson, where we were taught from a really early age by my grandmother an important lesson, pon tu granito de arena, which, for those of you that don't speak Spanish, means putting in your little grain of sand. The idea that no matter how big or how small, how rich or how poor, we all have something and a responsibility to contribute to make the world a better place. It was that desire to help make the world a better place that really inspired me after I fell off the edge of my bed and had to go to the hospital at the age of 5 for the first time. To look at healthcare as my way of helping other people. So I thought I was going to be a doctor. So from 5 to about 18, that was my path. I trained as a nursing assistant, as a phlebotomist, and I actually did 2 years of cancer research because I had an amazing public school in the Sunnyside Unified School District. I trained in our career and technical education programs. But at the age of 18, my life took a different turn. It was at the age of 18 that I was sitting in a high school classroom in my American government class, where I looked around the room and I saw that there were 40 old white men staring back at me. And I raised my hand and I asked my teacher, when was the last time a woman was president? And he said, well, women are too emotional. That's never going to happen, in a classroom of mostly girls. And I said, well, if we didn't have a woman president, when was the last time a person of color? And he said, that's not going to happen either. And this was something that was, I think, a really fundamental change for me, that here I am in a public school with a Latino majority classroom, mostly girls, and talking about how this was never going to happen for people of color or for women. I didn't like that answer, so I decided that I wanted to do something about it. So I started working on campaigns. But around the same time, I was diagnosed with something called Graves' disease, which is an autoimmune disorder. I was really, really sick, and I didn't have health care insurance because my dad, as a construction worker, didn't always have health care, but he also didn't always have work. And if it hadn't been for the state Medicaid program, the state Children's Health Insurance Program, I wouldn't have been able to get the health care that I needed to help save my life. So when we're talking about protecting things like Medicaid and Medicare, it's not something that's a distant idea. It's deeply personal to me, because if it hadn't been for the state Children's Health Insurance Program, the so-called Kids Care here in Arizona, I wouldn't be here today. I then, at the age of 20, was serving as an intern in the office of Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, where, when I had the skills and the training that I learned as a nursing assistant, was able to provide first aid. And for the first 9 minutes while we were waiting for EMTs to arrive, helped provide first aid for Gabby. It was then a couple months later that I was approached by people in my community to run for the Sunnyside Unified School District Governing Board. And at the age of 21, ran and got elected to the Sunnyside School Board, started tackling corruption and nepotism that had been in the district for a long time. And that wasn't something that made me very popular with my fellow board members, so they tried to recall me. At the age of 24, I survived the recall against me and actually turned around and recalled them. So I went from being in a 2-3 minority to being in a 4-1 majority, where we were able to elect a school district that was focused on delivering for Sunnyside kids, because the kids deserved better. At 26, I got elected to the Arizona State House and was the youngest member of the Arizona State House when I got elected. One of my proudest accomplishments was actually being able to pass a bill to protect and expand protections for the victims of sexual assault. And I did that by working across the aisle, finding other people who understood the importance and the value of protecting people who had been the victims of sexual assault. Very first bill that I introduced was one where I met women knocking door to door who told me how expensive the pink tax was. The idea that people who menstruate had to pay more just because they were women did not make sense to me. So I introduced and passed in the House Ways and Means Committee a bill to end the pink tax. Unfortunately, because of opposition from some of my own colleagues, we weren't able to get it done. But it's been something that's been a passion for me. Lowering costs is something that is so crucial and so important right now, not just in this moment, but it has been for my entire career. For me, it is important that not only we protect Medicare and Social Security, but that we also do everything we can to make sure that we get results for people. So, as a member of the Arizona State House, I worked and I passed the low income housing tax credit to expand affordable housing options here in the state of Arizona, including a tax credit that's being used right now in this district to build out new homes and new apartments in Pascua Yaqui for the people that live in the Pascua Yaqui tribe. And we're looking at expanding that throughout the state of Arizona. I also was able to pass and make sure that we got money for school counselors and social workers after the 2017 shooting in Parkland High School. I was horrified to hear from so many schools in Arizona that they were cutting counselors and social workers. So I worked to pass funding to ensure that we created a school safety fund so that schools could apply for a counselor or a social worker. And then in my last year as a legislator, was able to make sure that we passed one of the largest investments in K-12 funding that we had in the last 20 years. So for me, being a member of the legislature is important experience for getting to Congress. We are going to enter and we're going to have to fight against MAGA extremists and Donald Trump. I did that in the legislature. In 2020, after the election, my colleagues in the Arizona State Legislature tried to overturn the election results. And I was one of the leaders combating against that, making sure that we didn't overturn the election results because we knew that Donald Trump had not won Arizona, Joe Biden had. And this is something that's not controversial for most people to understand, but for the legislature, that was controversial. And I fought against those attempts. I also fought against attempts to pass crisis pregnancy center funding for multiple years, defeating that, making sure that we weren't setting up fake clinics that would give young women bad advice about healthcare and trying to get them to not have the healthcare that they needed if they were seeking an abortion. And then I also fought for years to make sure that as the chair of the LGBTQ caucus, we stood up against extremists that were trying to roll back the clock to 1950. And in 2019, I repealed a law that had been in place for 28 years that made it illegal to talk about the LGBTQ community. So when I'm talking about running for Congress, I'm not just talking about fighting, I'm talking about delivering and actually getting things done. I've done it as a legislator, I've done it as a school board member, and if elected to Congress, I'm going to make sure that we stand up to Donald Trump and the MAGA extremists and deliver results for the people of Southern Arizona and the western part of Arizona, because our district goes all the way up to Avondale and Tullison. So I am dedicated, I'm focused. I am excited about the opportunity to keep fighting because that's what I've had to do my entire life. When I was 17 years old and I almost died, I had to fight to stay alive. And if it hadn't been for the Medicaid program, I wouldn't be here today. My dad, who passed away in December, only lived as long as he did because he had access to Medicare and Social Security. So when we're talking about protecting these programs, it's deeply personal to me. My mom is dealing with cancer right now, and she's on Medicare. And the last thing that I'll say, and again, I want to say thank you to the other candidates for being here tonight. I think this is our first one where all three of us get to be together. So it's great to see the other folks tonight. I am somebody who is extremely passionate about making sure that we are electing more Democrats to every office. I have dedicated my adult life to getting Democrats elected. I've been to Yuma, I've been to Flagstaff, I've been to Bisbee. I've been all over this state helping elect Democrats. The first time I went to Yuma was in 2008, registering voters to make sure that we did everything we could to support Barack Obama when he ran for office in 2008. So for me, this isn't just something that's I want to win because I want to hold an office or have a position. It's because I know that Democrats have the right ideas, have the best intentions. And if we take the majority in 2026, we'll be able to be a check on the Donald Trump administration and to make sure that we're actually fighting for the people of Southern Arizona. So thank you all so much for having us tonight. I'm looking forward to the questions. And thank you, Zance, for opening up this opportunity for all of us to be here together.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the candidates. I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with folks. I think it's critical for folks to figure out, how they can get involved. So I am going to ask that during this time or before you hop off, if you could put the contact information or the best way for anyone to get plugged into your campaign if they're interested in helping out. And that way they have it. I'll make sure the folks in the room get it, and we'll send it out to folks as well, because while we can't officially, as you all know, get involved, any one of our members can, and each and every one of you are fantastic candidates. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. If you're in the room, just raise your hand, and I will have Mark help me call on you. And then if you are in the Zoom, please feel free to raise your hand. I do see one question already in the chat. So while you're raising your hands, I will go ahead and ask that one. So Blenda asks if you could please outline your strategy for restoring and advancing women's rights, safeguarding Social Security and Medicaid, and ensuring due process protection for immigrants. And that is a very long question. And I do want to be respectful of the candidate's time, but if you have any plans on those three, if you want to talk about one or just briefly talk about them all, we'll go, he's sitting right in front of me. We'll go with Daniel first and we'll work backwards if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah, I think it's an important question. I was actually the women's healthcare champion in the Arizona State Legislature, awarded by the American Council of Gynecology and Obstetrics because of the work that I did. One of the things that I didn't get a chance to mention is I actually ran the RAICE program. That's actually how I first met Deja back in 2016 when I ran the RAICE program, which was a Latino outreach program at Planned Parenthood. So for me, working on women's healthcare, working on women's rights is not a new thing. It's also something that I've had a lot of success, and it's become a passion for me, even though I'm never going to have an abortion. I think it's incredibly important that we do what we can to make sure, one, that we actually talk about what it is, because I think far too often a lot of politicians talk about choice, but really it's not about choice. It's about making sure that people have access to healthcare, and abortion is healthcare. I think it's important for us to also understand that when we're looking at what's happening right now, Arizona protected it in the Constitution last year. But at the federal level, we are having so many attempts to undermine things. We're having attempts to create these different things that aren't actually healthcare. There's these crisis pregnancy centers that are popping up all over the country, and in particularly in low-income communities of color. So I think making sure that we are doing what we can to stop any federal funding from going to these fake clinics that are giving people bad or poor advice about what healthcare options they have. So when we're talking about protecting things at the federal level, I've already been doing this work for a very long time as a legislator, as a school board member. I actually passed comprehensive sex ed because I saw what other districts were doing and it wasn't enough. And the Arizona State Legislature didn't give us enough room to do real comprehensive sex ed, but I passed the most comprehensive we could. And then in the legislature fought to create even better laws. So for me, doing this is something that I've already had success in as a legislator. I helped pass multiple pieces of legislation to expand opportunities for kids to be able to have better access to education, including, making sure we weren't expanding some of these things that were hurting kids. Stopping no promo homo was a really big thing. So at the federal level, I think one of the biggest things that we need to do is we need to do everything we can once we're in the majority to codify Roe. I think it's absolutely insane that for 45 years, Roe was the law of the land only through the courts, and we didn't codify it at the federal level. I also think we need to repeal the Hyde Amendment, because repealing the Hyde Amendment is going to make sure that we do everything we can so that people have access to healthcare, especially low income people who may not have access to healthcare. And the Hyde Amendment has made it illegal for us to be able to use federal funding to pay for abortion care. And I think when we're talking about Medicare and Social Security, I think making sure that everything we do is to keep those people at the forefront. People like my mom and my dad depend on Medicare. So this is not a crazy faraway idea. It's something that's deeply personal. And I think we need to reject any cuts to Medicare and to Social Security.
Thank you. Adelita?
Yes, thank you. So I'll go ahead and start backwards too with immigration. I think we have to is that we'll have to fight for legislation that creates workable pathways for citizenship to undocumented individuals, including dreamers, DACA, veterans, TPS recipients, and includes humanitarian parole, with all local entities to work with everyone to protect our community from unlawful executive actions, including raiding sensitive areas, attacks on our sanctuary cities, conduct outreach to make sure immigrants in our communities know their rights. And with Trump eliminating rights with every wave of the pen, ensuring that we work to let people know that there is a due process and we have to fight that. And right now, our courts are playing a pivotal role in really combating some of the executive orders and the lack of action from both from Congress, because we have to be holding the administration accountable. And right now we don't have the majority to do that. We have to uphold that due process and access to counsel, including for children and all forms of family detention and for-profit immigration detention centers, and use the budget process to put checks on the Trump administration's mass deportation and inhumane enforcement only agenda. Those, I mean, right now, as of a March 14th a memo that went out, they can just walk into our homes. They can knock down our doors if they know of any suspicious behavior, which doesn't have to be quantified, doesn't have to be explained. And that to me is just continuing to militarize our border communities. That's part of this whole system that they're trying to continue to push our nation to. And we have to support American businesses and our economy by creating additional visa and availability of reducing processing delays, ensuring all immigration workers are protected under labor laws and can report abuse without fear of reprisal. And we have to reform and modernize our immigration system by streamlining processes and reducing backlogs. There's so much that we have to do, and we have to uphold our asylum law and reject any policies that restrict or deny individuals the right to asylum, and put our community first by providing access to experienced constituent services and help guide immigrants and mixed status families in Arizona. There are specific bills that I would be championing. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of issue here. I would be championing health equity bill, health equity for all, and environmental justice for all, which is not, it really is about speaking up for those communities that do not have a voice. And I'm happy to get into more details about my ideas about those if we have the opportunity and time. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Deja?
Sure. I see immigration and reproductive rights as tied together because I was brought into this work as an organizer under the umbrella of reproductive justice, which is a vision that says that we should decide not only if and when to have children, right, with things like comprehensive sex education, birth control access, and abortion, but that we should be able to raise the children we do have in healthy and safe and thriving communities. And those are communities that are free from the threat of climate change, but also from the threats of things like family separation, right? Where families can afford rent and groceries. This is the overarching vision we can have for ourselves. And I know under this administration, it feels hard to imagine a better way of being. But I know that it is possible when we get active together. I was just out protesting at Tucson Medical Center, TMC, where immigration officials attempted just last week, I believe, to separate a mother and her newborn, right? This is a reproductive rights issue. And I've been on this, this has been my signature issue for the last decade. I was actually most recently out in Yuma County in San Luis, where I got to meet Lynette and her little one for a storytelling tour, where we brought Latinx storytellers, folks from all over Latin America who lived under extreme abortion bans. We heard from a mother from the Dominican Republic who lost her daughter to one of these extreme bans. And so we recognize that this is an issue not just within our borders, but that expands far beyond. When I think about what the path forward is, once again, this is personal. I am currently uninsured in one of the richest countries in the world. I am one of the millions of Americans without insurance presently. And that disproportionately affects, folks like me who are first generation Americans, and folks who are low income. And so, Medicare for all is of the utmost importance. Nobody should be one healthcare emergency away from bankruptcy, right? But we also know that when we look at abortion access, abortion is healthcare, and healthcare is a human right. And for me, restoring Roe is not enough. I echo the sentiments here that we need to repeal the Hyde Amendment, that how much money you have in your bank account or your zip code should not determine if you get access to care. That is not justice. That is not reproductive justice. And I'd go one step further to say that we need to do everything we can to protect access to medication abortion, because that is how so many of our folks in rural communities are getting access to care, right, through telemedicine. And we need to go above and beyond to protect that access. And I pushed for it even under the Biden administration. I'll share a story to close us out that I think really differentiates the kind of leadership I bring to this, which is that when Roe versus Wade was overturned, I showed up on Capitol Hill and I risked arrest. I was arrested alongside 181 other movement leaders. I know what it means to risk and to push back on this administration. And I know that we need to have a long-term vision for me and my generation, right? That generation to have fewer rights than our mothers. And that means looking at what we can do to reform something like the Supreme Court, right? Something that my generation will have to deal with for the rest of our lives. The court that Donald Trump packed, hand-selected to overturn Roe versus Wade. And so I want you to know that when in DC, I won't just be an elected who checks the boxes. I'll be a champion.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions for the candidates?
I guess I would say one thing, if I may. All three of them were outstanding, but just a question to all three. If you had to pick one main issue, what would that issue be for each of you to run on?
We'll go with Adelita first.
I think for me, the biggest one is public education, because it opens up so many doors for so many people. And it's not just about the bricks and mortar schools, it's educating in general. So when you're talking about helping people understand their rights, helping people navigate these systems that are set up to hold people that are, many of the people that are dependent on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, about 70%, over 70% of our district. I think it's important that we have to ensure that there are opportunities for that. But also when we're looking at the kind of programs that I was championing when we were in Pima County in workforce development, and making sure that people who perhaps did not finish high school, that they have a pathway not only to get their diploma, but also to get gainful employment in jobs that we actually have a lot of vacancies in. So one of the things that I think is really important is tying the work that we're doing to actual programs that are helping people out in the community. And so, education is not just for like the K-12 system or higher ed, it's also our preschool programs. And so one of the things that I did on the school board is expand preschool options. So every single elementary school in Tucson Unified had a preschool. And that was great, but we didn't have enough funds to really fully staff. And so one of the first things that I did when we were on the Pima County Board of Supervisors is push through funding. That's $10 million that go. So now every single district in Pima County, all of Sunnyside, Flowing Wells, Amphi, TUSD, Sahuarita, Vale, all have preschool programs that are partially funded from Pima County, because I think that that is the tie. And not only does that help young people get a strong start in education, but it also gives our working families an opportunity. So one of the things that I worked very hard to ensure is that not only are we going to open doors for young people to have preschool, but also make sure that those programs were housed in our public schools. because of the voucher system and empowerment grants and charter, like unchecked charter system, our public schools are being starved. So making sure that those programs were housed in our elementary schools and that those programs also opened up early and stayed open later. So working families would be able to utilize them. And then all of the snacks, lunch, breakfast was also out of the cafeteria at that same school. And so we're trying to create a feeder for all these young people to go in there. I think that there's so much that education encapsulates. And so I would say of all of it's a really hard decision, but I would say public education would be the biggest. Thanks.
Thank you. And then we'll go with Daniel.
Thank you, Xanth. I didn't get the person's name who asked the question.
My name
That
is
was
Don Cohen.
Perfect. Thank you for the question. I think the
Okay.
number one thing that I am worried and focused on working on is cost of living. I mentioned earlier that my dad was a construction worker. My mom was a Mexican immigrant. When my dad didn't work, we didn't get fed. And there were times where we were on food stamps. There was times where we almost lost our home. My mother actually started making cakes to help make sure that we had enough to eat and had enough things so we could do mariachi, so it could do soccer, because we didn't have enough with my dad's work sometimes. So for me, cost of living is deeply personal and important. And right now, what's happening is Trump and his cronies in Washington, D.C. are making our lives harder each and every single day by introducing these tariffs that are going to disproportionately impact and hurt this district in particular. It's going to hurt the produce industry in Santa Cruz County. It's going to hurt the agriculture industry in Yuma County. We need to stop and fight back against the Trump tariffs because those are going to be absolutely killer for the working class people of this district. But while others are trying to raise taxes, I've been fighting against tax hikes. One of the things that I think is really important is right now, our cost of living is too high. Inflation is really high. And that's happening because people are hurting. We need to do everything we can to reduce those costs. So as a legislator, I fought for the low income housing tax credit and passed it to help make sure that we had more affordable housing options. At the federal level, we're going to need to do more to expand those programs and to make sure that we're getting people off the streets. We're going to need to do more to make sure that we're fighting against the Trump tariffs that are going to cause so many people to go out of work if they go into full effect in Santa Cruz County and in Yuma County. But we also need to make sure that we're protecting our seniors, those that are on a fixed income, people like my mom and my dad. When my dad passed away, he was on Social Security, and my mom, when he passed, had her income get slashed almost by half because of the survivor's benefits not being nearly enough to be able to live off of. So people like my mom are who I'm fighting for. People like those working class families that were just like mine, where we didn't have anything handed to us. We had to fight and we had to work hard each and every single day just to be able to make ends meet. So I think when you're asking what is the most important thing to me right now, it's making sure that we have the opportunities that I didn't always have, that other people didn't always have for the next generation. But for those who worked their whole lives, that are seniors, that are retired, that they're able to live their golden years and not have to worry about cutting their prescriptions in half because of the cost of living. So I think focusing on cost of living so that we can protect our seniors and also make sure that working families are able to look forward and make sure that their kids have better opportunities than they did is going to be what my focus is if I'm elected to Congress.
Thank you. And Deja?
Yeah, thanks for this question. I wish I could ask it to each and every one of you. That is actually how I would rather spend my time. But I'd echo Daniel that for me, the number one issue is addressing this affordability crisis, right? I have lived on minimum wage. I've cleaned gas stations at the bathrooms at the gas station, right? Just to make ends meet. And I know the value of a dollar. But I also know that when I have young people sitting here in my living room, right, movement leaders, folks who are making minimum wage, when I ask them, what are the issues that matter to you most, right? The question we should be asking of our constituents and our leaders, they often tell me stories of how they save up those paychecks, right? And they don't get any closer to moving out of their parents' houses. How they are one car breakdown away from not making rent this month. And that it feels to them that home ownership was promised to older generations, but is a million miles away for people of our generation. And so, I think about housing as a human right, but also as a means for creating an opportunity economy. We need more units of affordable housing. And it's the way that we're going to create that economic opportunity for people of my generation. But I'm also looking at things like economic justice, right? Fair wages, raising the federal minimum wage, slashing and getting rid of that tipped minimum wage that is stealing from the pockets of some of our hardest workers. And I think, once again, the activist perspective I bring to this work means also being an obstructionist, using parliamentary maneuvers to stand between Donald Trump and raising and giving tax breaks to billionaires, right? Billionaires like Elon Musk, who attempt to take from our grandmother's Social Security checks with one hand while tweeting with the other, calling families like ours the parasite class. I'll close with one story. I've been out in community. I just visited an early childhood education center here in Tucson, where 80% of their funding comes from federal funding. And this is actually a center that I relied on, me and my family relied on when I was a child, that we leaned on. And, I sat with some of those teachers, some of those staff who are trying to fill the funding gaps because they serve with high quality education, children, regardless of their income. And so listening to those stories has lit a real fire under me. And I think one of the priorities for me as I head to DC would be to be an effective messenger of these stories, right? Not just the ones I've lived, but yours. And so, I hope to come down to Yuma soon. We plan to. And I hope that you'll use that contact information, connect with us. And I'd love to sit down and hear the issues that you care most about, so I can echo them in rooms just like this.
Thank you. I do want to be respectful of both the candidates' time as well as the fact that we do have a bunch of business to get through. So I know that I feel very confident we could continue this conversation all night. And I would love to do that. You guys have brought very thoughtful, very in-depth answers to a lot of the issues that this district faces. So I greatly appreciate that. I'm going to encourage every single one of you to reach out. Like I said, I will make sure to send that out, but if you are in the chat, those emails and contact infos were dropped. But please reach out to the candidates, check out their websites, get more information, and get involved. Because this is a very important election. And as most of you know, because I've been saying it since we found out about it, this district has a very low turnout rate. And in a time when they're not expecting an election, we're going to have even more trouble getting them out to vote. So I really encourage each and every one of you to get involved, roll up your sleeves, and help these candidates, get through the primary. And then obviously we'll go on to the general from there. But thank you all so much. Thank you to Adelita Grijalva, Danielle Hernandez, and Deja Fox. Very much appreciated for your time, and good luck to all of you.